I have filed 17 mission reports in my career. 14 of them are lies. Not tactical omissions. Not classified redactions. Lies. The kind you compose at 0300 cycles with hands that won't quite stop moving, because the truth, the real, unredacted truth, would end your commission, ruin your clearance, and begin a very uncomfortable conversation with command about what exactly constitutes maintaining field cover when field cover has warm hands and laughs like gravel settling after a landslide. This is Report 15. I will try to be accurate. I will probably fail. His name was Marcus Webb. Human, I knew that before I saw his face. Combat medic. I learned that in the first hour, from the stillness of his hands and the way he'd already inventoried the space before I regained consciousness. He was something else entirely after that, something the xenobiological field manuals don't have a classification for, something that lives in the gap between asset and I'm getting ahead of myself. I do that. My superior officers have noted it in 3 consecutive performance reviews, and I have ignored this feedback in each subsequent year because the truth is that getting ahead of yourself is what happens when you've been trained to predict threats, and some things arrive that you cannot categorize as threats no matter how hard you file them under that heading. He was not a threat. He was, professionally speaking, the worst thing that can happen to an undercover field officer operating in a contested urban zone, a human with no particular reason to help me, who decided to help me anyway, and then, and this is the part that still sits unresolved in whatever I use instead of a chest, kept deciding. 11 days. A collapsed transit station. The war moving around us like a river dividing around 2 stones. I should have reported him. I should have done a great many things. Instead, I learned what rain smells like through human skin, which is, I have no word for it in any of my 4 operational languages, which tells you something. I learned what it means to be sheltered by something that has every reason to leave you behind and chooses, with the quietest possible casualness, not to. And I learned, to the profound disruption of my professional self-image, that shelter, given without condition and without performance, is one of the more dangerous things one living creature can offer another. This is that story. It doesn't end the way reports are supposed to end. But it ends the way this one had to. Filed under Field Intelligence, Contested Zone Operations Classification, Restricted Personal Notation Attachments, none. Reason for no attachments, none of your business. The wall fell on a Velde, which is the Keth equivalent of a Tuesday, a day so aggressively unremarkable that the universe apparently felt obligated to compensate. I was 3 blocks from the extraction point. 3 blocks. I had crossed 11 kilometers of contested urban zone on foot, in partial cover, with a busted secondary comms relay and a bruised anterior shin I was pretending wasn't there, and I was 3 blocks from the extraction point when the transit station decided it was done standing up. It didn't collapse dramatically. No fire cascade, no cinematic slow-motion debris. It coughed. A structural wheeze, 4 floors of prefab composite settling into the street with a sound like the world clearing its throat. I was under it when it coughed. This is the part where field training is supposed to engage. Where years of assessment and response drilling are supposed to deploy themselves in the gap between stimulus and consequence. I fell through a floor panel and landed on a medical supply crate and lay completely still for what my suit's internal clock later reported was 11 minutes, during which I conducted a thorough inventory of every bone I owned and rated their current emotional state. Ribs, 3 cracked, possibly 4, vocally dissatisfied. Left arm, functional, holding a grudge. Head, present. Operating at approximately 60%, which I told myself was generous and knew was not. The scent reached me before my eyes adjusted. Smoke. Hydraulic fluid. Pulverized composite that tasted like the inside of old walls. And, underneath all of it, warm. Something metabolically warm. The kind of warmth that means, living thing, medium-large, mammalian classification, northeast at roughly 30 degrees, not moving in the pattern of a threat. My nose has always been my most reliable subordinate. It files dispatches before the rest of my cognition finishes booting. I reached for my sidearm. Gone. Of course it was gone. Hey. Human Standard Dialect. Northern Continent Register, slightly rounded vowels, the aspirated consonant carrying more air than southern speakers, relaxed delivery, or a very good performance of it, impossible to distinguish at first contact. I catalogued this automatically. I catalog things automatically when I am broken. It is the thing my brain does instead of the other inventory, the one that runs when I have nothing to organize myself around except what happened to my mother and what happened at the Wren station crossing and the 3 months I spent in a debriefing room being slowly convinced that the things I remembered were not the things that had happened. Cataloging is cleaner. Cataloging has external reference. I prefer it. He was crouched 4 meters northeast, half behind an overturned transit bench. The first thing I registered was the way he was looking at me. Not with threat assessment, I'd have processed that faster. Not with pity, which I'd have processed with considerable hostility. Something more operational than either. The look of a person who has run a quick calculation and arrived at a conclusion and is not, notably, troubled by having arrived there. Standard coalition gray-brown, uniform torn at the left shoulder. Something rust-colored and dry on the sleeve I filed under not his blood or not only his. A field medkit open on one knee, instruments laid out in the particular order of someone who has laid them out this way enough times that their hands do it without supervision. A carbine leaning against the bench beside him like a comma, not an exclamation. He didn't raise it. How bad, he said. I became very interested in the stenciling on the supply crate I was sitting on. Cat Standard Logistics Typeface. Military-grade ink. Fading at the lower corners, moisture exposure, probably warehoused in a coastal sector, probably shipped overland in the third quarter when humidity spikes in the define bad, I said. My cover languages had engaged without my permission, because some training runs below the level of a 4-floor fall. He made a sound. An exhale with editorial content. The kind where you need help, he said, or the kind where you're already planning to not need my help and we're both going to have a terrible time about it. I looked at him then. Properly. He had one of those faces that accumulates rather than constructs. Not designed. Gathered. Something that had been through weather and come out the other side rearranged rather than erased. A cut above his left eye, poorly attended, the blood already oxidizing at the edges. His jaw had a particular quality I decided immediately to stop trying to file anywhere useful. His hands on the medkit were completely still. Humans with completely still hands in crisis situations make something in me go quiet the way nothing should go quiet when you are in a collapsed building in a contested zone with broken ribs and a missing sidearm. I noted this. I did not know what to do with it. I moved on. 3 ribs, I said. Possibly 4. Head impact. Suit integrity at 72%. He nodded once, like I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected, and stood up. Okay, he said. Let me look. The collapse had been structurally strange in the way that saves you. The station's central support columns had held while everything around them hadn't, leaving a pocket 8 meters by 12, roughly, rubble-walled on 3 sides and open on the 4th to a corridor crushed to half its height. Heavy equipment worked to clear. Days, probably, for either side. He told me this while he taped my ribs. Not narrating. Not explaining. Thinking out loud in the way that some people run their cognition externally, like an open program, like they've long since stopped bothering to have private thoughts because thoughts are more useful when they're structural and shared. The corridor made extraction slow for both sides. The dust settlement pattern indicated upper floor stability in the short term. He'd found the water recycler in the cache already, still functional. Ration packs for 8 days if they were conservative, 11 if they weren't. He said they without appearing to notice he'd said it. I noticed. Your coalition forward unit, I said. Yeah. I'm not. I can see that. He pressed careful fingers along my 4th rib and watched my face, not to read the pain, I thought, but to read whether I was going to lie about the pain. Does that change your situation right now? The protocol answer was yes. Subsection 4 of Field Manual 7 was extremely clear on this point. If cover integrity is at risk, you must, my left ear flicked. The involuntary one. The tell I had spent 3 years training into obedience and had apparently not finished training, because here it was, filing its own unauthorized dispatch. He didn't comment on the year. Filed it behind his eyes with everything else he was filing, and kept working. Radio shielding's partially intact in this sector, he said. Signals in and out are unreliable at best. Best case, 2 days before either side has the zone remapped enough to attempt recovery. A pause. The recalibration that happens when someone is being honest rather than reassuring. Worst case is longer than 2. You've done this before. Not a question. The still hands. The ration count before I asked for it. The calm that isn't the absence of fear. I know that calm, I have worn it, it is the absence of nothing, but something built beside fear, something that has learned to occupy the same space without fighting for it. Twice, he said. Karev passage was the bad one. He handed me 2 painkillers from the medkit. Whole ration pack with those. Not half. The ration pack tasted like compressed grain and institutional regret. I drank the whole thing. There are protocols, I said carefully, regarding non-combatant neutrals from opposing. I know what the protocols say. Silence. Dust falling in slow lines through the hairline fractures above us. The distant percussion of something heavy being moved through a street 2 sectors north. The particular low-frequency thrum of a coalition air mover passing overhead, probably rerouting around the collapse zone, probably logging this sector as impassable and moving on. Webb, he said. To the middle distance, not to me. Then, Marcus. I looked at him. He had the voice quality that develops in people who have been in enough enclosed spaces with enough strangers to understand that the formal distances are for the places still standing. Not warmth, exactly. Something more useful than warmth. The acknowledgement that we were here, and it was what it was, and fighting the math of it would just be exhausting. My cover name was loaded and ready. Clean consonants. Rehearsed cadence. Vale, I said. Not the cover name. I pressed my ear flat and kept my face at standard neutral and did not examine why I had done that. He handed me a second ration pack without being asked. Something moved across his face, a brief, arriving and leaving without making a production of its visit, and he settled his back against the rubble wall and looked at nothing in particular. Okay, Vale, he said. Here's what we're going to do. Outside, the war continued without us. The city made its sounds, the specific acoustic profile of a place being methodically unmade, a sound I had catalogued across 14 reports and was already, without wanting to be, hearing differently. Less like data. More like a frequency that lives in the back of your teeth. He built a perimeter. Improvised composite panels against the weakest rubble wall, a tripwire sensor cannibalized from his suit's auxiliary alert system strung at knee height across the corridor entrance. He did this with the systematic quiet of someone who had long since stopped finding competence interesting. It was just a thing that needed doing, so he did it, the way you drink water, the way you breathe. I watched him work. This is the part 1 wrote in the mission log as established temporary shelter with local asset and, then, stared at for a long time before saving the entry. He came back and sat 2 meters from me, close enough to respond if something happened, far enough to give me the thing I had not realized I needed, which was space that was not being used to assess me. He drank from his own ration pack. Looked at the wall. Your ribs are cracked, not broken, he said. You'll breathe easier by tomorrow. You're certain? No, he said. But that's the better version, and right now we're running the better version. I settled my back against the composite wall. The pain organized itself into something I could work around. My secondary instincts were still prickling, still running their ancestral calculations about proximity and warmth and the specific weight of not alone, and I was having a detailed internal argument with those instincts about professional conduct. The professionalism was losing on points. Outside, something exploded. Far enough to be sound rather than danger. The pocket shuddered once, dust releasing from the ceiling in thin white lines. Neither of us moved. Second day in Karev, he said, unprompted, to the mid-distance, we had a ceiling doing this for 48 hours straight. Turned out to be a ventilation drum cycling 2 floors up. Wasn't structural at all. A pause. Took us a full day to figure that out. I looked at him. He was looking at nothing in particular. His expression held the specific neutral of a person offering a thing that might help without wanting you to feel obligated to receive it. 48 hours thinking the ceiling was coming down, my brain said. Offered as context, not complaint. Your finest 48 hours? I said. That non-smile again. Arriving and leaving. Working on it, he said. I looked back at the wall. The logistics font. The fading ink in the corner. Day 1. 10 to go. I opened my mission log and wrote, Day 1. Shelter established. Situation stable. Asset, unknown quantity. I closed it without elaborating. I should have elaborated. I didn't. By day 3 I had cataloged him the way I catalog everything I don't know what to do with. This is not a defense. It's a confession. His sent profile entered the mission log on day 2 under the heading Environmental Atmospheric Notes, which is a category I invented specifically to avoid writing what I was actually noting, which was cold-pressed metal with something warm underneath it, like bread that has finished cooling, like the inside of a coat that has been worn for a long time by someone who runs warm. There was a secondary note I also entered, and then deleted, and then re-entered, and then left in the file with the quiet resignation of a person who has stopped pretending to themselves. I left it under irrelevant sensory data. My superior officers have never read my raw field logs. I am grateful for this every single day. The days develop structure the way damaged things develop scar tissue, not by design, but because something in the system keeps trying. Morning, Webb checked the perimeter first, then the water recycler, then the ration situation. He did this in the same order every morning. I noted this on day 2 and cataloged it under behavioral routine, possibly compulsive, then revised the entry on day 4 to behavioral routine, almost certainly deliberate, structuring the hours into something that has edges. I recognized this. I do the same thing with my mission log. We do not discuss it. He had a photograph. Carried it in the left breast pocket of his uniform, which I know because on day 2 a piece of debris shifted and his hand went to his chest before it went anywhere defensive, in the order that tells you what a person is actually protecting. He looked at it once each morning, returning it to the pocket with the care of something that has been handled a great many times and is still being handled carefully. I never asked. He never offered. This is the only thing I will tell you about the photograph. He was funny in the way that some people are funny who have no interest in being recognized as funny, the humor arriving in small packages, set down and left there, requiring nothing from the recipient. Day 4. We had been attempting to boost the comms relay using components from the supply cache and his suit's auxiliary systems. This was not going well. It was, in fact, going in the specific direction of not going at all with some enthusiasm, and I had been reconfiguring the same junction for 40 minutes and had nothing to show for it except a growing certainty that the component was damaged beyond field repair. Den mother's teeth, I said, which is not something I say when I remember I am undercover. He looked at the junction. Then, at me. My grandmother, he said, used to say something that translated roughly to "May your enemies find their water tastes like feet." I don't know if that helps. I looked at him. Does that help anyone? I said. It helped her, he said. She was 94. I looked back at the junction. I did not smile. I am noting, for the record, that I did not smile. We rebuilt the junction from scratch using components I found in the secondary cache, and on day 5 we got 3 minutes of carrier signal before it dropped out again. 3 minutes was not enough. We noted this in our separate ways, him with the practical recalibration of someone who has learned to treat failure as a step, me with the silent addition of the word "yet" to every sentence in my mission log that began with "we cannot." This is also something I cataloged. And did not know what to do with. He barely spoke about himself. What I assembled was peripheral. The way you read a room by what's missing rather than what's there. He ate methodically but never more than his calculated share, which on day 5 I verified was slightly less than his calculated share. When I pointed this out, he recalculated the packs and offered a figure that still shorted him. I pointed this out again. He revised the figure once more and looked at me with an expression I will describe only as a person who has been caught doing something they consider unremarkable and is mildly inconvenienced by the attention. He slept in 4-hour cycles. Woke quietly, no residual disorientation, which is the signature of someone who has woken in bad places enough times that their nervous system has stopped treating waking up as the same thing as safe. He didn't ask me to keep watch. He arranged it as a shared structure, presenting it as practical, as efficient, and I accepted it as practical and efficient, and we both understood this was not the only thing it was. There was the whistling. Almost inaudible. Below the hearing threshold of most species, which meant he probably believed it was inaudible, which meant he had no idea I could hear it. A few notes, indistinct, not quite a melody. He did it when he was thinking, running equations, retracing steps, sitting in that particular stillness while his mind processed something it hadn't finished with yet. I did not tell him I could hear it. I am not going to explain why. On the afternoon of day 6, he touched my shoulder. Watch rotation. Standard. My 6 hours, then, his 4. He came to relieve me, and he put his hand on my shoulder the way you put a hand on a shoulder when you are trying not to startle someone, gentle, present, giving you a second before the contact fully registers. I was thrown back 5 years. Not metaphorically. Not like being thrown back. The pocket, the rubble, the dim light through the cracks, gone. Different ceiling. Different weight. The specific pressure of a hand that is not being gentle. 3 seconds. I came back. He had stepped back without making it a withdrawal. He'd set a ration pack on the ground between us and was looking at the corridor entrance, one hand loose at his side, and he was talking. Not at me. Not about me. Talking about the Karev passage and the specific quiet of someone providing an external signal. Here is a sound, here is a voice, here is a thing outside your head to follow back. Third day in Karev, the guy I was with, Ose, spent 4 hours trying to fix a radio with a field knife and what turned out to be complete optimism. The radio stayed broken. But Ose seemed better after, which was the point, I think. He had known exactly what he was doing. He did not ask what had happened. I picked up the ration pack. Did the radio ever work? I said. No, he said. Ose maintained it was going to, right up until extraction. How did that go? The extraction was fine. The radio never worked. Ose is an engineer now. Makes very good radios, apparently. I ate the ration pack. I reached for the anger the way you reach for a known thing in the dark, not looking, trusting your hand to find it. It came. Warm and familiar and steadying, the way it always steadies, the way nothing else does. Anger at yourself is still anger at something, which means it has edges, which means you can stand next to it, which means you have a place to be. I was furious at the 5 years. At the 3 seconds. At the fact that it had not been the first time and would not be the last time, and there was nothing tactical or catalogable about it. I was furious at the part of me that had followed his voice back like it was a rope I had been thrown in a current. I noted none of this in the mission log. I noted, day 6. Comms relay partially functional. Perimeter intact. Cover status, maintained. Day 7 he showed me how he'd improvised the trip sensor without a power cell. Not because I asked. Because he'd been thinking about the structural weakness on the north wall and wanted a second configuration, and he talked through the physics of it with the ease of someone who teaches by including you in the problem rather than presenting you with the solution. He had 3 components and needed to make them behave like 5. This is an extremely human thing to do, I noted, not seek alternatives, but ask more of what you have. I showed him the Keth triangulation method for estimating structural stress from vibration patterns. You read the resonance. Small impacts, the way the debris stacks answer them. He watched me demonstrate it once, looked at the north wall, walked over and placed his hand flat against it and stood there for a moment. Here, he said. Right here is where it's carrying the load it shouldn't be. He was right. I looked at him. He looked at the wall. You learned that in one demonstration, I said. You explained it clearly, he said, which was generous and also not an answer, and he began rearranging the secondary supports without further comment. I stood there for a moment. Pack loyalty, I thought, which is what I had categorized it as in my early assessments, this instinct he seemed to have for treating whatever small group he was in as the unit that mattered. Closing the distance between his knowledge and yours, not to show you what he knew, but to make you harder to kill. I revised the entry. Not pack loyalty. Something older than that. Something that doesn't have a military classification because it predates the concept. I put it in the irrelevant sensory data file with the bread cooling note and the photograph I never asked about and the whistling I never told him I could hear. Day 9 the carrier signal held for 11 minutes. Long enough to establish a partial location handshake. Not long enough for coordinates. Not long enough for a confirmed extraction window. But enough to know that both sides were looking, which meant that the math of the days was changing, the shape of the end becoming visible at the edge of things. He sat with this for a while. I sat with it longer. There is a moment in every cover assignment where the cover becomes load-bearing in a way it wasn't designed to be. Where it stops being the structure over the thing you're protecting and becomes the thing itself. Where maintaining it stops being professional and becomes something you are doing for a reason the manual doesn't account for. I had reached that moment sometime around day 4. I had not filed it. I was running out of days to keep not filing it. 11 minutes, he said, that evening. That's 3 times yesterday's window. Yes, I said. Probably enough by tomorrow for a directional fix. Probably, I said. We ate our ration packs. Outside, the city sounded slightly different. The heavy ordnance 2 sectors north had been quiet for 18 hours. The patterns were shifting. The war was moving, reorganizing around new priorities, and we were sitting in the leftover space of old ones. Vale, he said. I looked at him. He was looking at his hands. The still hands, the hands that went to the photograph before they went anywhere defensive. He had the expression of a person who was about to say a thing that they have been deciding whether to say for some days. When this is over, he said, and then he stopped. Left it there. I watched the side of his face. Yes, I said. He nodded. Neither of us elaborated. This is what I wrote in the mission log that night, day 9. Signal improving. Extraction probable within 48 cycles. This is what I did not write, everything that had accumulated, wordless and persistent, in the specific category I had been maintaining since day 2, the one I called irrelevant and which had been the most relevant thing in the file from the beginning. Some truths are patient. They will wait for you to catch up. On the morning of day 10, my comms established a clean directional fix. 23 minutes of clear signal. Long enough for coordinates. Long enough for a recovery window. Long enough for a full status report, a cover confirmation, and a quiet extraction that left no trace. He was asleep. 4-hour cycle, second hour, the specific stillness of someone who sleeps the way they do everything efficiently, without performance. I sat with the open comms link for 8 of the 23 minutes. Then, I closed it without transmitting. I made a note in the log, day 10. Signal contact established. Cover status, maintained. I did not write what I had decided or why I had decided it, because I could not write it in language that would survive a command review, and also because I was not yet using language that would survive my own. Day 11 arrived the way the last day of a thing always arrives, with the specific quality of something that has been coming for a while and is not, despite this, less of a shock. His comms established contact at 0700 cycles. I was at the perimeter check. I heard the relay open and the brief handshake signal that means position confirmed, recovery inbound, and I stayed very still beside the rubble wall with my hand on a piece of composite debris and did the math that I had been doing in the background of every previous day's math, the math that doesn't require a new calculation because it's been running constant. He was going home. His side had him. Recovery window in 4 hours. Standard coalition extraction, coordinated entry, clean exit. I was not in this math. I had not entered the calculation. I was a condition of the environment, like the rubble, like the dust, like the damaged ceiling I had learned to read by resonance. I could stay behind the secondary rubble stack and not be seen. He could go. Coalition record would show, 1 recovered coalition operative. Keth record would show, field officer, status unknown, last position contested zone. 2 clean reports. Both technically accurate. No one accountable for the gap between them. This was the correct protocol. Subsection 4 of Field Manual 7 said this was the correct protocol. I had read subsection 4 37 times in the past 11 days and I had not found a single sentence to argue with, and I had been unable, for reasons I could not make manageable, to give a single sentence any weight. I came around the rubble stack and sat down where I always sat. He was already looking at me. He'd had the relay open and he knew I'd heard it, and he was looking at me with no particular expression, just present, just waiting, the still hands patience of someone who was going to let you get where you're going on your own. 4 hours, I said. Yeah, he said. The ration packs were down to 3. He'd been shorting himself since day 7, by my calculation, which meant there were more than 3, and he'd staged the remainder somewhere I hadn't checked. I noted this with the part of my brain that notes things and did not have a file category for it that I trusted. Your unit will clear the zone, I said. Yes, he said. Corridors still blocked for heavy equipment from the north. From the south, he paused. 2 hours, maybe 3. Which meant his extraction window and my cover window were the same window. Which meant the math was what the math was. I looked at my hands. He looked at the corridor. Veil, he said. I looked up. He had the photograph in his hand. Not looking at it, just holding it, the practiced hold of something handled so many times the hands know its weight. He looked at me the way a person looks when they've made a decision some time ago and are only now delivering the conclusion. I'm going to file you as a protected neutral, he said. Coalition recovery. Non-combatant status. It goes in my report, my name on it, and then you go through standard processing and you're out in 48 hours. I stared at him. You understand, I said carefully, what that does to your commission. Puts a note in my file, he said. Yeah. More than a note. Maybe. He turned the photograph over once in his hands. Maybe not. Depends who reads it. He said this the way you say a thing you've already accounted for and have decided isn't the point. You'd have gone through standard processing anyway, eventually. This just makes it, he paused, easier. Easier. There was a word that had never appeared in my mission logs in 15 years of fieldwork. This is not your responsibility, I said. My voice had developed a quality I did not recognize in it and could not immediately classify. You are not obligated to the protocol specifically, I know the protocols, he said. Then, why, he looked at me. Just looked at me. The wall laughed. I had once thought, 11 days ago, lying on a supply crate with broken ribs and a missing sidearm, the wall laughed. I had catalogued the misapprehension and corrected it and continued. Moved on. The correction went in the log and I had told myself it was funny, and it was also not only that. I had never corrected the other entries. The bread cooling note. The whistling I never told him I could hear. The photograph I never asked about. The voice in the dark that I had followed back like a rope in a current, and had kept following, and could not locate the moment I had decided to keep following, because I did not think it had been a decision. Some things are not decisions. Some things are what you have been doing all along. He put my location into his recovery report at 0900 cycles. I watched him do it. Watched his hands on the relay, the still hands writing me into his official record, protected neutral, non-combatant, field recovered, with the same systematic quiet he had used to build the perimeter on day 1, to tape my ribs, to set down ration packs without asking, to talk about Karev when I came back from 5 years ago in 3 seconds. His name. On a document. That would follow him. You're going to be interrogated about this, I said. Probably, he said. I'll be boring. Boring. I'm good at boring. He closed the relay. Looked at me. You went through a bad period in the second week. I thought the ceiling might come down. I kept you calm. I had no idea what your operational status was, and I didn't ask because it wasn't relevant to getting you out alive. He said this with the dry delivery of someone running through a script that is almost entirely true. That's a very boring report. And, if they press. Then, I maintain it was a boring 11 days in a collapsed building. I looked at the ceiling. The hairline fractures I had learned to read by resonance. The dust that had settled so completely by now that the air was almost clean. It wasn't boring, I said. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. It wasn't. The extraction team arrived at 1340 cycles from the southern corridor. For coalition operatives, heavy clearance gear, weapons slung not raised, they'd had the pocket on sensors since the morning, web signal confirming it, and they came in the way units come in when they're recovering one of their own and have been told the situation is contained. They saw me. The one in front, senior unit, the particular bearing of someone with field years, looked at Webb. Webb looked back with the expression I had come to think of as his operational face, present, unremarkable, quietly certain. Protected neutral, he said. I filed it this morning. She's been medically assessed, ribs, minor head impact, suit integrity around 50 at this point. He looked at me. I had not told him my suit had degraded another 22%. He had apparently done the math himself. She needs the 48-hour processing circuit and, then, she goes where she goes. The senior unit looked at me for a long time. Looked at Webb. Filed it wherever senior units file things that are technically clean and, contextually strange. Understood, he said, and that was the last anyone said about it. They put me in a separate transport. Standard. Expected. I sat in the gray padded compartment with my back against the wall and, my suit's internal clock running and, my mission log open on the small interface screen, cursor waiting on the field marked Day 11, final entry. I could hear the other transport on comms. Routine check-ins. Coalition chatter, route confirmation, estimated arrival. His voice once, answering a unit inquiry, clipped and unremarkable and exactly the voice I had been listening to for 11 days through every hour the days had been made of. It crossed to static. Then, silence. I looked at the field marked Day 11, final entry. A truthful account would contain the cover name I had not used. The comms window I had not transmitted through. The entries I had made and deleted and re-entered and, finally, buried in a category I named irrelevant so I could keep them. The 3 seconds it took to come back from 5 years ago, and the voice that had given me the rope. The photograph I never asked about. The document with his name on it that would follow him and that I had no professional standing to prevent and had not attempted to prevent. What it had meant, and here is where the entry breaks down, here is where the cursor sits, here is where 15 years of field language fails because field language was not constructed for this, what it had meant to be seen, entirely, without being assessed, without being managed, by something with no reason to shelter you that kept finding reasons anyway. I reached for the anger. It was there. Sweet and, familiar and, mine. I held on to it for a moment, the professionalism I had compromised, the cover I had bent, the file that would require careful management, the conversation with command that was coming, the whole structural inconvenience of what 11 days had made of me. I held it as long as I could. Then, I put it down. I looked at the cursor. I closed the log without writing the entry. I have filed 17 mission reports in my career. 14 of them are lies. Report 15 ends here, incomplete, cursor blinking in an empty field. I'll write the rest when I find the right language. I'm not sure it exists yet. But, somewhere in a coalition debrief room, Marcus Webb is being boring on my behalf, with his still hands and his photograph and his voice that sounds like gravel shifting after something has passed through, and I think the language might be coming.